Superintendent.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight we continue our budget presentations with a presentation on our transportation budget. So Mr. DeVito will take it from there.
Okay, just need a little minute to get this.
Oh, there's a button on the back.
I'll make notes on this.
Okay, good evening, everybody. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is the New York State Comptroller's Fiscal Stress Report. It came out in the news today. It's something that comes out every year since 2013. You see I have a graph up here on the board, and you see here this number 20. Okay, this was our score for 2013. So there are about 5 elements, different factors that are part of this composite score. In 2013, our school district received a score of 20. You can see it was below this line that says susceptible, and this category is no designation. Then we had the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy. We had to borrow money in order to pay for our reconstruction expenses, and we didn't have a lot of cash flow because of the borrowing situation. So our scores over the past 3 years were up in this susceptible to fiscal stress range. This past year, school year 2017, our score was 26.7. You see it's the lowest score that it's been over the past 4 years, and it's just at this borderline of susceptibility. If our score was below 25, we again would have been where we were in 2013 of no designation. So why are we still in this susceptible range, even though we're at the very low end of the range? Is because of the cash flow that we had in getting money back from FEMA as reimbursement before June 30th. We received 2 big payments in October and in November, and if we were able to count those 2 payments that we received of about $3.5 million, if we had received them before June 30th, our score would have been at 20 again, and we would not have been above that susceptibility line. I did a projection of where I expect us to be at the end of the 2018 fiscal year, and I believe our score will be about 6.7. And I'm basing that on the fact that we will have the cash flow coming in from FEMA to bring us where we're not getting any points for that category. We know our fund balance is healthy. That's worth 50% of our score. But we will still have some points for the fact that 1 year over the last 3 years, we were in a situation where we ended the year with expenses more than our revenue. And that's the situation that we've had when we had to use reserve money. Anytime we have to use reserve money to help pay for our annual expenses, we're in what's called a deficit situation. And through this New York State Comptroller's fiscal matrix here, if you ever have a year over the last 3 years where you're in that type of what's called a deficit situation, you get some points for that. But in every other category, we're considered doing very well and healthy.
So Mr. DeVito, is there something that we can do as a district to put it up on our website
Sure.
to explain it properly? Because I did receive 2 phone calls about it today. People were questioning it. So I would rather the correct information get out, if we can do it via our website or.
So what we did was when we found out that there was a story that played in Newsday today, we contacted Syntax, our communications firm, and we put a statement together, and it should be already on the web.
Okay,
I worked with them
thank
this
you.
afternoon. And I just wanted to get copies. I have copies of the graph and copies of tonight's presentation. I just didn't get a chance to distribute it, if you don't mind. So there's the graphs and then copies here for the board, and then we'll put the rest out here. So just to sum up, yes, in 27, just above this line of susceptibility, but the reason is, again, because it's still the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy. That otherwise our finances are sound, although I would not like to have Long Beach part of, there were 4 districts on Long Island that were in this, somewhere in this fiscal stress. Everyone else was what's called no designation. It is for a very specific reason. It's because of the cash flow with Sandy. It's not something inherent about our financial structure. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so if everyone's ready, I'd like to start our presentation for this evening. But before I do, I just would like to introduce our new transportation supervisor, Mr. Bill Callahan. If you can stand up for a second, Bill. I'd like everyone to say his name. We're very happy to have Mr. Callahan with the district, and he's been here just about 6 weeks, and I think he's off to a great start. So thank you, Bill, for being with us tonight and for being part of our first Transportation Department budget meeting of the year. So here we're talking about Transportation Department, and before we go into the specifics of the Transportation Department, what I'd like to do this year is take one slide from each of the previous presentation, just as a little bit of a recap to try to bring everybody up to speed. So when we first did our major presentation in December, I talked a little bit about what the current program would cost at next year's prices. And what we were able to come up with, you see we have some categories on the left, some categories on the right. The categories on the left are those where the budget has to increase, and the categories on the right are where the decrease. If you take a look at the 3.57 against the 0.17, you see here that the net position with our current program is an increase of 3.4 million. What that means is all of the classes that we have with all of the teachers and all the administrators and the health insurance that we have to pay for our staff, which is a benefit that all of our staff get to receive who are full-time, the TRS, which is our pension fund for the teachers' retirement system, FICA, payroll taxes, the different payroll taxes that we have to pay, all of those, what you consider in a sense mandated or contractual entitlements, we have to add to the budget. Now, last week, we started talking about facilities, and we started talking about how we may change the program a little bit or keep it the same. And I had said to everybody that for the most part, we are keeping our facilities program the same. And it's actually been a very stable area of our district. And you see here from 2 years ago, we spent about 8.1 million. This doesn't include any of the benefits that you saw on the last slide. And then last year, we spent about 8.2. We had budgeted originally about 8.5 for this year, but we're not going to be spending that kind of money in facilities. We're going to be able to save a little bit of money. And because of that savings of about $175,000, which is basically about natural gas, I said, let's bring down next year's budget. And that's basically the savings of about $175,000. So one of the things that I had wanted to do in terms of overall budget goals is to look for ways to save money so that we can offset some of the increases that we had that I showed in the previous slide. So what are we going to do with that $3.4 million? How do we pay for it? We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks when we talk about revenue. But one of the things that I look to try to do as we prepare next year's budget is ways to save, or at least reduce the budget where we know we haven't spent in the past. So there aren't many or major savings in facilities. It's just getting to a spending level that's more consistent to where we've been over the past several years. And the main driver that I had said last time is that we had budgeted conservatively for increases in price in gas and in oil. And I'd rather, if there is some sort of a price hike, take it out of our fund balance, do some sort of a budget modification, take it out of our undesignated reserve fund and to put it into the budget to be conservative. Because sometimes what happens if you put it in the budget and it's there, you end up spending it in another way. And another reason is if it's in the budget, we have to show how we're going to fund it. So I'd rather not increase the budget to be conservative, say we have to use reserve money, and then it turns out that at the end of the year, you didn't need it, and it just becomes confusing. So we took down in facilities this $175,000, so to equate more of what we think we're going to spend, which you see is pretty consistent. It goes up a little bit each year, but it's relatively stable. And the only major staff change that you see in this department is that we have a retirement of somebody who is a supervisor. It's actually a title as assistant supervisor, focusing on the custodial staff. And instead, we're going to have a replacement that focuses on the maintenance and the ground staff. And we'll have all of the head custodians report directly to our director of facilities. Besides that, there aren't any major program changes. All the buildings are still going to have the same cleaners and custodians and mechanics and groundskeepers. It's just really that change in terms of the natural gas budget and in terms of that staffing change in facilities. So now I'd like to get into transportation.
Mr. DeVito, could I just ask you a question?
Sure.
Would you have part of that figure for operations if snowstorms and unexpected, blizzards and overtime expenses? Is that part of it?
It is.
How did you measure that?
Sure, we take an average, like a 5-year average of what we spend in overtime, and we use that. So if we have a year where there's lots of snowstorms, I'd rather do a budget modification and take that from our unassigned fund balance where we have enough money there, we have what's recommended from the state, as opposed to putting it actually in the budget.
Just so the public knows that
Thank
that's
you.
where the money comes from.
Yep.
and that's-
Because when you think about it, that's really what that unassigned fund balance is supposed to be for. The state recommends keeping 4% for different types of situations where, you have something unexpected, and I'd rather use it for that purpose than to be too conservative on a budget where we really don't have the means to pay for it. Because just what I had discussed on the onset with the contractual salary increases, with the health insurance and pensions, we're still going to have a tough time figuring out how to pay for it. Tax levy is going to go so far because of the cap. Whatever increases in state aid is only going to go so far, and it's going to be close. It's going to be close to really make the ends meet for next year. So thank you, Mrs. Taggart, for the question. So anything out of the ordinary, I'd like to take from that unassigned fund balance. So let me talk a little bit about the transportation department. When we talked last time, a couple weeks ago, we had said that facilities really is two main categories or function areas. There's operations and maintenance. Here we have transportation, you have more. So the main category is what's called district transportation, and that's category A5510. As most of you know, we have very specific categories that we have to put in for categorization of our budget, and that's all comes from the state. So A5510 is a state code. Every school district across New York State, if they have district transportation expenses, salaries, equipment for buses, bus repair, or parts for in-house work, you're going to see this type of numbering system. A is the general fund, as opposed to a grants fund or the food services fund. The 5510 is always going to be district transportation. And then the .160, that's our salaries for our bus drivers. Anything that starts with a .1 is compensation. .200 is always going to be equipment, no matter what function it's in. .431, if it starts with a .4, it's always going to be expenditures for vendor services. So a .431 is bus repair with an outside vendor, and .507 is parts for in-house work. Any code that is in the middle starts with a .5, you know that's going to be supplies. Another function area for the transportation department is the garage building. A5530 this time, right? So the 5, you know you're in transportation. The 530, we know you're talking about the garage building. And then it's that same system. .160, salaries for bus mechanics. .20 is the equipment for the garage. .431 is garage repair and maintenance, like an oil cleaning service that we engage in order to do the oil cleanup in the garage. .509, uniforms for bus mechanics. Part of the contractual benefit for the bus mechanics is they get uniforms. Where do we pay those codes? Where do we actually categorize it? .509, uniforms for the bus mechanic. This is supply. 3 other categories, function areas that are part of the transportation department. Again, A, general fund. 5, we're talking about transportation. 540 is the private bus service. It's called contract transportation. 550, public transportation. If we ever have an expenditure with the Long Island Railroad or any type of a nice bus service, MTA bus service, if we have kids going to school in those areas and they take public transportation, that's where it's charged. BOCES transportation, a separate function code. Usually BOCES codes are categorized a little bit differently, but transportation, it's 5581. 5 different function areas, all part of transportation in Long Beach. Again, this is of a general nature. more for your information, it talks about these object codes. It's the codes that are in the middle section of the budget codes. Salary, a headline. We're looking to reduce the transportation budget for next year by about 2.5%, which is about 157, or really closer to $158,000. Again, like I did 2 weeks ago in our facilities, I'm looking for ways to reduce these budget lines for next year so that we can make ends meet without reducing services. Looking for trying to peg different codes at 5-year averages, looking for ways to save money. So here in particular, I'm looking to save money in contract transportation. I'm going to talk a little bit more of the details of that. And if you take a look at these 5 areas that I just highlighted before, district transportation, garage building, contract transportation, and so forth. Here are those function codes again that I mentioned. You see here the main savings is right here, $855.40, about $100,000 in contract transportation. This gives you some historical perspective or context. These are the actual expenses for 2015-16, 2 years ago. Last year, the actual expenses for 2016-17, what we originally budgeted for 2017-18, which may not quite be enough, and we'll have to probably transfer some more money from the facilities budget to the transportation budget, which I'll explain in a little while, and our proposed budget for next year. But just take a look at the price increases overall. 6.1 to 6.3. Like I said, this is turning out not to be enough, and then going back to about 6.2. And look at the line where most of this is increased, contract transportation, okay? So that's how you look at the macro view of this department. You look at trends, you see what's happened year after year. You can zero in on which are the function areas. You see district transportation, which are our own in-house bus drivers, our bus aides, the garage mechanics, pretty level the past couple of years. And we're looking to come in a little bit under. We're not looking to reduce any bus drivers. We're not looking to reduce any positions. We're not looking to reduce anything like that, but we are looking to get better pricing, okay? If you take a look at the notes here, you see here we are projecting a total decrease, which I just talked about. Number 2, the main driver of the total 2018-19 proposed budget, the main driver here is a projected savings in contract transportation because we expect to get better vendor pricing. At the end of this year, we are going to go out and rebid all of our contract work. We may include some of our in-house work with that and try to get better pricing. We've been working with the consultant. The consultant has shared with us that she thinks that if we go out to bid alone, just Long Beach, that we will get better pricing for the from the vendors like We Transportation and Suburban and First Student, all of the vendors who help us do our work that we can't do in-house, okay? She thinks that we can go out and save about 2.5%. Excuse me, save about 5%, which overall is a savings of about 2.5%. Staff salaries, this is our summary slide. All right, you see here, relatively stable. The last 2 years, we spent between 3.1 and 3.2, and we're looking to spend about another 3.2. So you may say, well, we know we settled the contract, right? We know we had to put more in, right? Because it was the schedule, everybody's moving along the schedule. Why? Why is our proposed budget so similar to our current budget when we know that we recently settled an agreement with Group C and the salaries are going to increase? Okay, it's in number 2. Stability in district transportation function between the original budget of the current year and next year is due to some offsetting factors. Movement along the salary and an increase in the retirement incentive, you'll see in the line by line, makes that code go up. However, there is a reduction of a budgeted driver because we had actually 57 bus driver positions budgeted because we had a lot of long-term absences. We had brought on an extra bus driver last year because of our absences, and we took that position then out of the budget, and we're back to the 56 that we've always had. So you got a savings there. And we're expecting a retirement at the end of this year. That lower cost retirement replacement brings it down. So you have salaries and the costs going up, and some offsetting factors coming down. We also shifted some costs to a different fund. We get reimbursement for our summer special aid transportation, and it's better to account for that in a different fund. So you'll see that coming off. But if you take a look at the staff salaries for the garage building, right? Here you see that 5% increase, 5.34% increase. That's pretty much more or less the value of the salary increases due to the staff, due to the contract settlements. They're pretty much about 4%, but we anticipated a change in staff. We were going to save some money on a staff member, and it turns out that there wasn't that savings that we had anticipated, so it's going up more than we thought. Here's your line by line. Last time when we talked about transportation, we didn't go into the whole line by line because we had talked that it was going to be more of a summary presentation, but we had said early on that we were going to focus specifically on transportation, go into detail on transportation because we hadn't done that in a few years. So this is when everyone talked about the line by line. If you take a look at our budget, whether it's in our finance system, manager system, or a report, this is every line that's in the transportation by function, right? This 85510, that's all district transportation. The .1 and then 160 or 161 or 162, that's all staff salaries. And then the rest of the numbers have to do with location, or it has to do with a certain program. Okay, is it for the arts? Is it for clubs? Is it for athletics? Sometimes we separate it out by program. And you see here it's relatively stable, right? The only thing here is we're anticipating a little less in overtime, because now that we have a permanent supervisor, we don't anticipate spending as much on overtime. We're giving overtime to some of the dispatchers and the safety inspector to try to help fill in some gaps. We don't anticipate that. And you see here the others are basically the salary increases that we just talked about. The drivers, right? We talked about why the drivers is only going up by the 0.5 because of some of those offsetting factors. And then with the dispatchers and the safety inspector, that's more or less what the increase is for salary, meaning step and the new salary schedule. It's about a 4%. Here's the staff salaries, the line by line for the garage. You see here different function. Now we're 5530. .1 is salaries and the different line by line codes. And you see here the garage mechanics, you may ask, again, why did it go up by 7.75%? And the explanation is here. It's because of, really it's about a 4% increase in salaries, but there was a change in how we were staffing the garage. We thought there was going to be a retirement. We thought we were going to be able to go for a lower cost, so we put less in this year's budget, but it turns out that that didn't happen that way. So when you go then to jump from what we thought we were going to have to really what we're proposing, it's a bigger jump. It's almost like a 2-year jump. Equipment, the easiest of all, because the line by line is the same as the summary. Why? Because there are only 2 lines of equipment in transportation, one for district transportation, one for the garage. And if you take a look here, you see here we're expecting to get some cameras and GPS. We're budgeting for cameras and GPS for our buses. And we're not going to spend any money in the garage this year, and that's why we get, for next year rather, that's why we get to reduce. So we're trying to offset the fact that, again, it's going to be a tight budget year, and sometimes you have to say we're not going to go for any new equipment. And our garage is in good shape, so we don't have to worry about putting money in that line. Vendor services. Here we have the 5 different areas, 5510, 5530, 5540. You see they all start with a 4, a .4 afterwards. That's the object code. All have to do with vendor services. The note here, the subtotal transportation for vendor services, 2018-19 proposed budget is less than the 2017 original budget by about $100,000 because of that new bid. So this is where you get to see it in the summary form, and then here's where you're going to get to see it in the actual line by line. Right? Here's that $100,000 of the anticipated savings by getting in lower bids. Well, what's happening in the other areas in the line by line for vendor services? So here we have our district transportation, everything in-house, heat, telephone, electricity, insurance. What did we do here? Is again, we tried to either keep it level where we thought it was just at the right budget level or use 5-year averages. We were able to reduce from insurance, which is an interesting area, because as the buses get a little bit older, the premiums come down, same as with your car. So we're able to save money because the average premium has been coming down unless you get a new car, right? So where the savings we see here is basically because that average premium has been coming down. What our target for the fleet is to have 53 large buses and 12 small buses. So that's really what we want right now, and what we should be ensuring is the 53 large, 12 small, and that includes some spare buses, just in case the bus breaks down. We keep that on the fleet, we keep that insured as well. Travel conference, equipment rentals, professional services, again, everything that's part of that district transportation line. You see here an increase of about 45,000. Sometimes, as we go over our budget, we realize that, something should be recoded. And what we had discovered is that the way the bookkeepers were breaking out any of our repair and maintenance costs is they take the cost from the contractor, and they would take out any parts or supplies and put that in the supply portion. So they compartmentalize the expenditure. You're not really supposed to do that. So what we did is we added 45,000 to this line, and you'll see a little later on, and we took the 45,000 from the parts line, just a better coding. It's not an increase or decrease in the actual expenditure or the projected spend. This is now the garage, 5530, everything beginning with a .4. This is the object code. It's the second series of digits right after the first decimal point. And you see here that we went to a level that is more consistent with the 5-year averages of expenses, and that's why we were able to drop this down, the repair and maintenance, down by about 6,000. We didn't need that much money in the code anymore, so we could trim that a bit. Here we have now a different function. Now we're talking about the contract transportation, 5540 now. Then you have a decimal point and you go with a 4. We're talking about vendor services, and you have the different lines, whether it's 400 or 450, right? This is all the types of expenditures that when we have to contract out to go to something with music or club or athletics, because sometimes we can't do it all in-house. That's how much we spend there. And you see, compared to the overall contract transportation, it's relatively small. These are just small little line items, and you see here the very specific line items where we expect to get the different pricing. Supplies, only 2 function areas that have to do with supplies. And if you think about what we said earlier, it'll make sense. We only have 2 in-district operations for these functions. We have our drivers, our bus aides, and our office staff, and we have the garage. We're not going to pay for supplies for a contractor. We're not going to pay for supplies for BOCES, so we don't have those codes there. We don't have it. We only have the .5 and A5510, which is our district transportation supplies, and A5530. Here's where that transportation, some of that you'll see here. This is the summary version, and you'll see that it's representative of this 45,000 that I just talked about that we needed to add to the contractual coming out of supplies. So here's that other line item there. But I just want to take a moment and talk about number 2. The reduction in district transportation supplies, right, it's A5510.5, is based on 2 main factors. Why did this come down? The use of a 5-year average for expenditures that I've been talking about over the past couple presentations, and, for example, supplies for vehicle fluids or regular gas, and also the recoding of the district transportation parts. So that's the note that talks about the impact of going to the 5-year averages and the shift in the code nomenclature. This is the line by line for the garage. You see here, pretty level. Policy issues. This is our last 2 slides of the presentation this evening. Things that I'd like the board to consider. As many people know, the beginning of the year is a very stressful and chaotic time in transportation. One of the reasons why it is so hard for us in Long Beach is we provide an extremely high level of service. One of the things, and this is the first thing I'd like to talk about, is the transportation that we provide from school to religious instruction. Most districts don't have that. Typically, a child goes home, and then it's the responsibility of the parents to take their child to religious instruction. What happens is at the end of September, beginning October, when students start to become involved in religious instruction, is then we have to somewhat redo our busing and think about loads. Well, is one bus that incorporates St. Ignatius, is it going to be too crowded? Going from Lindell or West School, do we need another bus? Do we need to shift? And then what happens if there's a program change, at, whether it's St. Ignatius or another religious instruction school, then where are those kids going to go? Who's going to be responsible for the phone calls? So something that happened recently was that there were 3 teachers who were sick, and they called us and said, now the kids have to go on the regular bus. And you have school secretaries and principals scrambling and teachers scrambling because a student that was supposed to go on bus number 1, because that's the route that picks up St. Ignatius, but maybe they live in Lido, now they have to go on bus number 5 to Lido. And when do we get that message? And how does the teacher know, okay, wait, this student now goes on bus 5, but on the bus pass it says it's the alternate. Is it going to save money? Probably not. Is it going to reduce stress? Is it going to go to an expectation that most parents have, let's just say across Long Island, reasonably have, which is it's your responsibility to get your child to religious instruction, whether it's at East School or whether it's over in the West End? I'd like us to reduce the stress that we have in transportation, that principals have, that teachers have. I'd like us to reduce potential confusion. I'd like us to reduce the stress on the kids. Sometimes we have kids in tears because they end up going on the wrong bus, and there's this misnomer that the child is lost. The child is never lost. The child is just on the wrong bus, and it's very stressful. So I'm recommending that we discontinue transportation services to after-school religious instruction. Second item is very similar. Most districts, if they provide it at all, provide for one alternate stop. What does that alternate stop mean? It means that if a child lives at, has their home residence and they go to school, and let's say on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday they go to a babysitter, whether it's in the morning or whether it's in the afternoon, that's one alternate. And let's just say, for argument's sake, that the child lives in Lido and the babysitter lives in the center of town. That child is now going to go on a different bus. Okay, we have situations. Let's say both parents work, they live in Lido, and they both take the train. And let's say they take their child to the babysitter in the center of town on their way to the train. Now that child is going to get on a different bus to go to Lindell than they would if they were in Lido. So that's one alternate stop. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the child's home, okay, because a parent can put the child or walk the child to the bus stop. And let's say on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, then they go on a different bus because they go for the babysitter. That is something that I think reasonably the transportation department can manage. One alternative stop. What we have now is an unlimited number of alternate stops. And there have been, I've seen them, there have been students and families that can go on a different bus 5 days a week, a different bus in the morning, and a different bus in the afternoon. And the teachers, especially in the beginning of the year, usually they master it after the first couple of months, but if you have a sub, okay, it's stress again. And they are trying to manage this one child and the 10 possible or 8 possible different routes that child can go on, whether it's the morning or the afternoon or what day of the week it is. So I'm recommending that we go to one alternative stop per student. The third item is to discontinue transportation services for students who are not eligible for transportation based on the distance between their home and school. So what we allow now is we allow a student who lives within walking distance, and I'm going to use East School as an example, who lives in the canals, walking distance. But the parent, for whatever their needs are, working childcare needs, is not able to walk or allow the child to walk to the bus stop or to walk to school. Either doesn't want the child to walk alone or isn't able to walk the child to school. So they can now say, I'm going to have this child, even though I'm not eligible for transportation, go to a babysitter or a friend, and sometimes it's muddy, whether it's a babysitter or a friend, that lives just within or outside of the walking distance. Now that child's eligible for a bus. So there's a bunch of kids now who are now eligible for transportation because of arrangements and addresses that are provided when they weren't. So it may be a legitimate babysitter that lives far enough away from a bus, or it may not be. So there's some abuse there. Right? That's where there is an additional cost, because if we're trying to plan for eligibility, whether they're walkers or not walkers, but then a walker can become a bus rider because of a change in putting in a request form, it's cost, right? So I'd like the board to discontinue transportation services for students who are not eligible. If you're not eligible for transportation because you live close enough to a school to walk, you're not eligible for transportation. And that does exist in other school districts. The last two items for consideration and for the presentation itself, I'd like to require in-district high school students to take public transportation instead of providing a school bus. Now, this is a little bit more extreme. I understand that. It's something that we talked about with the city several years ago when the tax cap first came up. And it's something that we have to resume conversations with the city to make sure we have enough buses, to make sure that the schedules run properly. But it's something I want the board to think about, and just to be aware that it is a possibility that if there was a time when they were ready to think about leveraging and doing collaborative services with the city of Long Beach and using the public bus system, it is a very easy thing to do in this community because the buses go east-west and there isn't a lot of walking to get to those bus routes on Park or Lido Boulevard. It's not something that I'm putting a heavy push on right now. It's really something for consideration. Something else that I'd like the board to think about is for our middle school here, where parents have to take their out-of-district students here and then get bus service out of the district, and then get dropped off here at the central point, and then the parents would pick up the kids.
Question of the board. It'd be much more helpful to me, although I think I understand most of them, if I could see a cost attached to each, or what an expense would be related to each of those present practices. So I would be better informed in terms of making the...
So for the first three, I don't really anticipate much of a cost savings at all. It's just about confusion and safety. The other two, we will definitely get that together. These were just items I wanted you to start to think about, but we will be able to cost that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. DeVito, for the presentation, and welcome, Mr. Callahan. I just have one quick question. I probably missed it in the presentation. The $68,000 reduction in the summer.
Yeah.
I missed where that was.
Okay. So you see here that we reduce the budget line for summer aids. These are all the special education aids for the special education, the year-long program that we offer, and a reduction in the cost of the special education transportation. What's left is the transportation that we do to our regular general education summer school that we have at the high school. Right? So we used to budget for it, and then we would post the cost to our special aid fund because we were able to get aid for that at 80%. And it would end up being a surplus here. So it would help to contribute to the surplus at the end of the year, or if there was another code throughout the year where we were running a deficit, then we would say, okay, we can use that money and transfer from that code. I'm trying to move away from that for two reasons. It leads a false sense at the end of a year that there's actually more money than there really is. And it's really a more appropriate way to budget in terms of, we know, and it's pretty, if you're reasonably sure you're going to be able to get a grant for this money, or you're going to get reimbursed and it really gets charged to another code, you don't have to keep this budget line here. You can reduce it and know that when the costs come in, you post it to this special aid fund, you're going to get reimbursed. And we do get reimbursed 80% of our summer special education costs. But we do have to budget for 20%. So when I talk about, as Dr. Ryan asked about the buses, when I talk about this transfer to other funds, I'm going to mention to you, you see this line item here in transfer to other funds? This is that 20% of our summer special education costs that we budget for, but it should be in a different code. So for here, we're able to reduce the number, the budget, without a reduction in service. And then we don't have to come up with 65,000 of revenue to pay for this cost that's really not a cost. That's something that at the end of the year, we know at this point that we're not really going to have a cost in it. Thank you. Yep.
Mr. DeVito, thank you so much. As always, can you hear me? Okay. As always, an informative presentation. Mr. Callahan, welcome. I hope you're enjoying it as much as
Possible.
Okay, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but as I sit through these presentations year after year, I think I'm finally starting to get it. So some of my questions might be really off base or not, but let's hope they're obvious. You did mention early in the presentation that we're going to have a revenue projection in a few more budget meetings, but we've all been reading the newspaper. We've all heard what the tax cap is going to be. We all saw the initial state runs for state aid. Can you give us just an idea?
Sure.
Like, does it look good? Does it look bad? Does it?
Yep. I'm more optimistic than I was in November. So there's this thing called the tax-based growth factor. We've had some growth in our tax base in our school district. That allows us to go above the 2%. The cost of living, the CPI is about 2%. The increase, whatever that tax-based growth factor is, allows us to get closer to like a 2.7%. That gives us about another $700,000, which is great, okay? And I would encourage the board to go to the max on the tax cap, even though it is 2.7, because we need the revenue, right? But that's a discussion for further on. State aid, our foundation aid didn't go up very much, only about $45,000. Our building aid for next year is projected to go up by $200,000, not because they changed the formula, but because we spent money this year on emergency expenses, and part of, as you may recall, you get that money, that aid back the next year, right? So we get 33 cents on every dollar we spend. If it's emergency, next year is aid. But that's great for us, right? Because of the increases we have in health insurance and the pension and some of the contract settlements. The other money that you see in the state aid run, that's going to change, right? That's a projection, and historically, the 1.7 they say we're going to get back in BOCES aid, we pretty much get 1.5, all right? So that's 200,000 less than what you see in the papers. The say 750,000 that we get for high cost aid that they projected, maybe we'll get 500,000. That's another 200. So I think it's about a $400,000 will be less than that. And then there's something called an offset that we get for some of our homeless students that's not in the state aid runs that we're going to have to deduct with that homeless reduction that usually comes up to about 100,000. So that 3.3 is artificial. When I get some better numbers, I will come forward. It will be more. It will probably be about 300,000 more, which will help, but it's not 880,000 more. So it's 300,000 more than the level, right, than what we have this year. We will be able to raise more in tax levy. I think we're going to come pretty close. I have a feeling it's going to be, maybe we may need to use about 200 to 300,000 in fund balance, but it's also, I think you'll see a little later on, it's because we're going to try to change some of our programs. It's what we've been talking about in our budget meetings. And you will see in the next several weeks some increases to program because of things that we want to do, and I'd like to use some fund balance to do that.
I look forward to those presentations. Okay, question-wise. You actually answered so much of everything I had. I personally would find it helpful as we look at these charts, because it's the same years and the same, columns each week. I guess my question is, are we on target to stay within our budget in each of the lines that we talk about? So for instance, with respect to, we have we have our actual expenses in 15-16, and then we have our actual expenses in 16-17, and then we have a budget for 17-18, our current year.
Uh-huh.
But so it would be helpful to me to know that, that first line, if we're budgeted $33,000, that we've spent half of it, because, or maybe it's not that kind of thing. You know, maybe you spend the whole thing in the beginning or the whole thing at the end. But overall, it would be helpful to know if we're staying on track with our budget, because if we're underspending by large amounts, then maybe we can make bigger cuts. And if we're over budget by large amounts, then we definitely need to be budgeting more. So I guess that's your job, and I should just.
Well, it is your business, but that's part of what you delegate to us, right? And I try to be mindful of time here, right? And the audience, you know, try not to have you glaze over with too many numbers, right? The last meeting was more of a summary level, and I heard from some board member, oh, it seems a little bit short. So I didn't want to disappoint, right? So I made this one a little bit longer with the line by line, because I never want anybody to feel like they're getting gypped out of a budget presentation. But to do more than this, I mean, this ran about 35 minutes, right? That kind of detailed analysis is what Dr. Gallagher, Dr. Natale, myself, and every principal and every head of office go through to get to this point, right? When we present a number, it's after we've vetted it. Now, I'd be happy to do that perhaps in a different venue, maybe if the board wants to do a subcommittee and we'll meet differently to go over that. I'd be happy to share it, but to expand upon this presentation when we have these board meetings, I think perhaps it may be too long. I know you've asked for line by line, so I'm bringing the line by lines, but to go into more detail with the forecast and where we are here in January versus the forecast for June and when we get the information, it's a lot, and that's really what we spend our budget cycle on, 8 hours a day.
Is the projected $100,000 that you're hoping to save with the new pricing on the vendor contracting, is that going to be a temporary savings because we're entering, we're going to
Great
enter this
question.
one time, or is it going to?
That's why it's such a critical strategy for us operationally, is that if we can bring our baseline down, even if we bring it down 5%, hopefully it'll be more, we have the option to extend with these contract extensions at CPI, which 1%, 2%, and we don't have to go out and bid. So we tried it, right? It was good, well-intentioned. We tried to see, let's go out to bid and see what we got. But what we get, prices came up higher than if we would have extended. You're not going to know that unless you try it. But it is still a competitive business, and there are still vendors that want all work, and that's why it was recommended to us to go out to bid on our own. Let them be very clear, this is Long Beach work, bring that baseline down, and then allow us to then continue with these contractors, because if we show a commitment to the contractors that if we bring your prices down, we'll extend, then it gives them some predictability on their business, and not feel like the next year we're going to go out to bid, maybe lose it. And that's kind of the trade-off there, is that they have the predictability between their costs low enough that then you don't go out to bid.
So the point is that it would be a permanent savings for us. It would just be next year and then it would shoot back up.
Yeah, I mean, it would grow incrementally, but it wouldn't shoot back up.
Okay. And I think when you were talking about students, high school students taking the city bus, were you referring to the Budget Advisory Committee a few years had made a presentation that included some transportation recommendations? And I think that one of them was having the city buses at least stop at the middle school, I think, or in the high school.
It was, especially for the late buses.
Right.
Yeah.
And did that ever get off the ground? Did that ever happen?
We had some discussions, and there were some issues with schedule, some issues with the route. But if it was something the board was inclined to pursue, it would be something I'd like to resume discussions about in terms of their capacity and perhaps some revenue increases that they would receive, because we would pay for the busing, we would be able to pay for the fare. It would be less than the cost of the school bus, and it could be an opportunity for the city to get some revenue, boost up their ridership, and for us to save some money. It doesn't need to be wholesale, but it could be maybe the late buses. or maybe a couple of the late buses, right? It's something that we could explore. And as we all know, students that live in New York City, this is the primary way that the high school students get to school, is public transportation, whether it's the subways or the buses.
You don't mention anywhere in your report the late buses that we use, about making any changes into either the early morning or the late buses. I see a lot of buses floating around Long Beach later in the day.
Right.
Do you have any recommendations, or that you pretty much for next year are thinking we'll keep the same?
Well, for next year, we'll keep the same, but it's something I'd like to take a look at, because we do have kids involved in after-school activities and in sports. If we had a tolerance for allowing students to ride on a bus a little longer, we could save by maybe having 1 or 2 buses that just go, one look out and loop around. We'd have to be prepared for that, and we would save some money. It's not something I'm recommending right now. I'd like to have the opportunity to take a look at it, and as you would expect, to project some savings and go through the logistics and prepare for some consequences in terms of students and parent expectations.
I think this is my last question. When you're talking about not providing bus service to religious education, and to having only one alternate stop, you said that that's not as money-saving change, but that it would be a confusion-saving change. And I'm not really clear there. First you called it stress, then you called it confusion. Is it a safety issue for our kids, or is it we don't want to deal with all of this kind of confusion and stress?
Primary is safety, right? Because we did have a couple of situations where, and this is mostly at the beginning of the year, where there is confusion, so it is confusion, and sometimes the bus passes are incorrect, and a student gets on the wrong bus, and then it's a safety consideration. Now, again, we always keep our students safe, but it's safety in the sense of student potentially can get off at a stop that's not their stop because they realize that they're not in the wrong bus. It's a risk, let's put it this way. It increases the risk of some sort of a safety concern. But our bus drivers work very hard, as well as our dispatchers and supervisors that we've had, to keep track of students. So when we get a call from a parent that my child did not get off at the stop, where are they? We track them down, we call the other buses, do you have so-and-so? And we always find them. We locate what bus they're on. But I don't want to press that situation too much, because to me it feels like a risk. I don't want to press it. I'd rather try to make it clear and more streamlined that you know you're going to get on bus 3. You know you live where you go to school, you live, it's bus 3. Maybe you'll also get on bus 1 on certain days, but that's it, right? And again, with the situation that happened when class is canceled, and a particular religious program, any program that asks, well, what can we do now? Parents have an expectation that they're supposed to go to religious instruction. Now if it's canceled and then they're going to go home, is the parent home? Can the parent go home? What's the expectation? Everybody lives complicated lives that are with work, childcare, and I think we have to keep it as simple as possible.
In that regard, over the years there have been many discussions about the traffic issues at the high school. And I recall Mr. White saying, well, if the kids are supposed to be on the bus, don't drive them to school. Put them on the bus, because the less traffic we have there, the safer everybody's going to be. So I'm specifically thinking of East and West School because of their location and the congestion in those areas and the streets in those areas. But I think probably the same thing would be true at Lido if middle school kids are coming out for the 3:30 bus. So my question is could we handle all of those parents picking their kids up to take them to religion on Tuesday and Wednesday? West School's a mess at dismissal in terms of trying to manage the traffic. The middle school is dangerous to say the least with the amount of traffic that's in there during dismissal time. So are we potentially making the problem worse by saying, okay, parents, if you have religion that starts at 4 o'clock and the child has to go from school to the, wherever they're going, then you have to come to the school and pick them up. I'm just not sure, I don't know, and
I think it's a great point. So perhaps the religious instruction doesn't have to start at 10:04, it can start at 4:10 or 4:15. But if it is gonna be a crunch, I can definitely foresee parents going to the school, pick up the child to get them to religious instruction on time. So our expectation is that the child will go home first, right? But maybe you raise a fair point, maybe part of it is talking with the different religious schools, finding out their thoughts on it, and how do they feel, and parents, is it reasonable for parents to wait for the child to get home at the bus stop, and then to carpool, or do what people do in other parts of the island, you know?
I've often thought, especially with respect, this is kind of a little unassociated, but especially with respect to early morning buses and late buses, that maybe PTA could get parents to, like, if I'm driving to the high school for a 7 o'clock early morning extra help session to get my kid there, and I can fit 3 more kids in my car, I don't know where those kids are. So I don't know, I know that the district is not able to do that. I don't know if PTA is able to do that. Maybe that's a good use of Facebook now. But it seems to me that a parent-focused solution to this might be good. Yeah, that's what they used to know.
So as we had class parents, then we'll have carpool parents perhaps.
No, carpool executive director.
Okay. But the thing about for somebody else's comments about extra traffic, the potential to have extra traffic. I would think that's something that we would also have to look at for your last issue for consideration, where there would be one spot for parents to drop off and pick up at the middle school for out-of-district buses. I mean, the influx of traffic coming into that complex is going to be tremendous, I would think. How many students actually are out of district? Do you have that number?
I think it's about 500, maybe about 400 students.
So that's something that's a big consideration.
Right.
In
So
the
I will,
negative,
no, I
because
mean,
of the extra traffic.
again, fair point, usually that would be earlier, because
Right,
those schools,
7:30,
yeah.
7:30.
So I would anticipate that would be before people started coming into the middle school.
Right,
No,
but what
and-
about coming home?
We will study it, you know,
Yes,
take a
I mean,
look at
that's
it,
something
yeah.
that's really.
No, it's a fair point, Mrs. Deck, yeah.
I just did a piggyback, but welcome this Callahan. We're hoping you're enjoying Long Beach. We're a wonderful community, and we hope you really enjoy it while you're working here, all your hours. Thank you, Mr. DeVito, for the presentation. I just have a couple of questions that I don't think were touched on, other than paying close attention. How many buses would you say, what percentage of our buses right now have cameras on them?
Almost all of them.
Almost all. So with this proposal, for the budget, how many more cameras? Are these replacement cameras that you're looking at, or?
Some are replacement cameras, and we are getting the new cameras, the new buses, or the pre-owned buses
Right.
that I talked about. We need to outfit them with cameras, and we may not want to transfer an older camera to a new bus, to a new to us bus. It may make more sense because of the labor involved to just get a new camera and install it, and to take a camera that's several years old and put that on one of a bus that's new to us. So we'll be able to give you more of the detail in terms of how many and the costs. We're still working on the specifics of that, but I know that we're trying to weigh the GPS and the cameras and something else that was proposed to us about making sure that the microphones work on all the buses, so bus drivers don't have to scream,
Oh, that's a lovely thing.
right? So that they can speak in a normal voice,
They said
but
it was
that,
like-
right, but the microphones and the speakers work. So we're trying to get the right mix of the camera, the microphone, and the GPS and see where we're at. And I can have more information for you a little later on.
Thank you. Also, is our transportation building itself,
Yes.
okay, we don't need any work there, we
Well-
don't need replacement windows, we have shades now?
shades we have.
Yes.
Yeah. We do need to take up that building, and we talked about capital. It's not gonna be in this line, it's in our capital line. Our architect has taken a look at it, and we have money in the budget to keep it safe. But we do need to plan for a replacement building. One of the ideas that I had several years down the line, talked a little bit about it when we talked about our 5-year plan, is to build a new building and to possibly move the facilities over there as well. See what we can do to consolidate, because I'd like to explore using the Maple facility for an adult learning center. It's something, an idea I had that I'd like the time to explore. It's a few years out, but it is safe now, but we do need to plan for a replacement building over at transportation.
And roughly, I don't know if you have the figure off the top of your head, but the transportation services that we're providing to students who are not eligible for transportation, like we mentioned earlier, the walkers that would normally be walking to their school,
Right.
choice, the elementary school. Those, roughly how many students are you talking about?
I would say there's probably about 50 to 75.
So do you think that if we did that and we discontinued that piece of it, it would cause more of a burden on the schools that are not near the home, the student? Do you think it would push
It would.
families to,
Yes.
so that there would be an
More horizon applications.
yeah.
I do. It's something that I'd like us to just study a little bit more with the board. I wanted
And
to
then a parent would probably,
Yeah.
who may not have their first choice or second choice.
see the Walker School. Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to introduce these concepts to the board so we can start thinking about it together. We will be able to provide you with some numbers, costs, and so that we can go a little bit deeper. We're hoping that maybe at the beginning of May or the end of May, we can finalize some positions on some of these items for consideration. So we have a couple months to work through some of the details. Tonight was the opportunity to introduce them in the context of the budget presentation. I'm sure we're going to want to hear from some parents, talk to the different stakeholders that we have in the system to get some feedback, and then take this up for discussion again.
And you've had these conversations at roundtable with the PTAs?
We introduced the concept and said we were going to be talking about it with the board this year. A couple things that happened. I spoke to some parents at Lido PTA meeting. They had asked me to talk about transportation, and I talked to them about the operation, and I did raise to them that we were going to be talking about these issues with the board because of some of the complaints that we get from parents that it's so chaotic in September. We also had at least 1 or 2 roundtables when transportation issues came up, and I had said to them that we were going to be talking about it with the board and trying to make the best decisions. Because I think for some of the parents, I think even though it's an inconvenience, I think they understand the benefits of having less stress and less chaos in the system, because it will then bring it down for everybody. If everybody's scrambling to try to figure out what bus a particular child was placed on, then they can't answer the phone and they can't respond to concerns, and it snowballs, right? Because they're in crisis mode. We're trying to reduce the amount of time that office is in schools, because it's hand in hand. Principals and the clerical staff in the principal's office and the staff there, everybody goes into crisis mode because we're trying to provide such a high level of service to our parents. It's well-intentioned, we're trying to help them, we're trying to provide service to them, but at a certain point, we may need to say it's unmanageable. We need to pull it back a little bit.
Okay, so you've been here many years.
Yes.
Have you seen an increase in the multiple stops, requests?
It's not the same.
So it's about the same?
Yeah. It's
It's
been
not a
crazy.
good thing.
No, and it's always been crazy in September. And the other thing too, Mrs. Daggett, and for the rest of the board, is that sometimes parents don't have their arrangements set by September. So we send the bus passes out, we think everything is set, and then we get the applications for the alternate stop coming in September 5th, September 10th, September 15th, or a flood of them coming in that first day of school. And parents are, I'm relying on it. Like, I have the job, or I have the child care. You can't take my child home. You know, you can't go home. And then we're scrambling to change bus passes, to get the information to teachers, you know, teachers in charge, assistant principals, you know, everybody is on hand, all hands on deck, trying to figure out where these children should go, because we're trying so hard to provide the service. So it's also parents, and they're trying to make arrangements. It's hard for them too. But if we say, listen, you only have the one alternate, we managing expectations.
Thank you.
Yep.
Questions and comments from the public on the work session topic only?
I just have a quick question. Annie Conroy, 119 Audrey Drive. To Tony here. I really like the presentation. Thank you. I like the story you tell a lot about the transportation. I know you guys put a lot of effort into it. I would just like to know how much money would be saved by the considerations that you put in, because I think that would give me a clearer perspective on it. My children, I've always taken my kids after they've come home from school to their religion, so because it's not a school-related activity, so I don't understand how that started anyway. Because when they went to swim after school, that's not school-related activity, but it was at 4 o'clock. I never expected the school bus to take them to swim. So I don't understand why we're taking the children from school to religion, something that's not after school. It's not school-related. So that's something I'm thinking about. I would also like to thank the transportation during the blizzard time. They did phenomenal. I live over here on Greenway, and you know, one way in, one way out became one way completely. And these buses worked so hard to get the kids to and from school safely. It was really wonderful to see. I did call up, I forget the name of the councilwoman, and I screamed at her because the roads were not cleaned enough for our buses. So I hope that in the future, for future blizzards, for our buses' safety and our children's safety, that someone gets on the phone with those council people or whoever needs to be told and said, if the road is one way in, one way out, you have to clear it so the buses can safely go by. It was so bad that cars would have to stop half the block down so the bus could turn.
Are you in Lido or Long Beach?
I'm right here in Lido. I'm right on Greenway. So I have to see the full picture of what happened right by the high school and by the middle school. It was a disaster. And the kids who even tried to walk to school because the roads weren't paved, whatever the word is, taken care of properly. They had to climb over these huge, gigantic hills of snow. And they did it. I wish I had a picture to show you guys. It was just ridiculous. I mean, it's not your fault. But I really want to commend the transportation department. I don't know if you started yet, but the transportation department really did work above and beyond that day.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Presentation of the interim superintendent.
There's just one item on the agenda tonight, and I would ask that the board accept the settlement agreement as detailed in the agenda.
Motion made.
Any discussion? No? Okay, I'll call for a vote. Mrs. Taggy?
Yes.
Mrs. Roman?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Gardner?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, board comments, doing more old business. Anybody?
I just had two or three. One is, the last meeting I'd asked about data about hours versus days in other school districts.
Yes, it will be in your packet tomorrow.
Okay, and I'd also asked for greater attention being put on alumni as far as the district website is concerned in terms of the high school, in terms of resources, so I'd like an update on that. And one other item, I think it's about time of year when we look for the re-verification of students in terms of residents here, as we always do at budget time, making sure that we're educating the children who are live in Long Beach. And we just want to make sure that we are doing that, so.
You are indeed, those packets went out already.
Great, and if you could just send a copy home to me of what the letters were to the parents in terms of the re-verification, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
I just wanted to also congratulate the Buildings and Ground Transportation Department on the way they handled the storm. It was great. They did a really good job. I live on past the West End with those little teeny West End streets, and even beach and park were just a mess. So they did a beautiful job, as well as administration on the day of the car accident on Lido Boulevard. That was just beautiful, getting that parent link out right away so that people knew that there was a problem on Lido and if they could possibly avoid it, to avoid it. Good job. We're cooking
Just,
Can I just ask one more thing, Mr. Linsky? I just, in terms of these presentations, I've always been an advocate of moving them along. I think Mr. DeVito might have been referring to me in terms of the time and the length of presentation and the duration. It would be very helpful to me as a trustee on the way out, or if you see me in town or whatever, if you just let me know what you thought about the presentations, whether you thought that they were too heavy with detail, too heavy with numbers, whether you use it friendly for you in terms of that. Because as we move through the budget season, there'll be more and more presentations. So it's helpful for us to get that feedback, or I'll speak for myself, it'd be helpful for me to get that feedback so that we can customize them so that they are informative, but they're not going to kill you at the same time in terms of the data, the information. So I'd be grateful if you could do that for myself in terms of as we move forward. Thank you.
okay, just, Dr. Ryan, when you made the recommendation about the Alumni Association, I jumped on it right away, and I've been speaking to alumni, and we're trying to put together something. So just, I don't want you to think it slipped in the cracks.
Yeah, I'm not asking for an alumni organization, I'm asking for a link on our high school website for alumni so that kids can know where alumni are in the event they go to school there or they get a career
Yeah,
there.
that's what,
And then they have more
that's what they're
information.
trying to figure out.
Okay, but I think people in the school district should be developing that
We are.
and getting in contact with the alumni.
We're working on that with the high school district.
Okay, CTA. Hi. Group A, Group B, I'm sorry. Group C. Okay, PTA.
Jackie Rose, I'm with Buffalo Avenue. Thank you, Mr. DeVito, for your good presentation. And welcome, Mr. Callahan. I don't have any questions, really, just some thoughts while I was listening to. Just one thing came to mind. One of the considerations they would be about the high school, the rate of high school students' transportation. And just a lot of things come to my mind when you think about that. And so when you're consider when we're talking about safety of students, they're high school students and they're older. I think their safety still needs to be considered. When traveling on public transportation or traveling with the general working public. The district will have no control over safety. That would be obvious. And I guess this is something I grew up in Queens, so this is how I went to high school. And it's not, I know we still do it, but it is not good at all. I can't say one good thing about it. Because it is how I went to school. So we went to a bus stop at whatever time, 7:30 in the morning, and the bus comes, and you know how many people are on the bus? Like 100. And you have maybe 8 or 10 kids waiting on the bus stop, and maybe 2 or 3 can get on the bus, maybe. And 5 try to get on the bus, so 3 are literally smashed up against the door. Sometimes the bus drivers, I mean, maybe it's not like that in Long Beach, they might not be as crowded as that, but I don't know, I've never seen it, the public transportation full, business people traveling to the railroad, I don't know what it is. So that would be definitely something to look at. It's never, ever consistent. So students will be late because they will, the public transportation is not going to drive into the high school driveway. They're going to drop them on New York Boulevard, at Watkins Road, maybe, or wherever. And then they're going to walk from there to there. So many times in my 4 years of high school, we walked 30 minutes. It was preferable to trying to squeeze onto a public bus. So just some things to think about when you're considering eliminating that, if you do consider eliminating that in the future. It doesn't sound as good as it might. It's not. Thank you.
It isn't as good as it actually,
I think it might be.
Well,
it's
the same thing with the school.
well, it's, I guess, weighing the pros and the cons. Like, the pros would be maybe financial for the district, but there are definitely quite a few cons. And I had flashbacks when I saw that. Wow, well, I remember walking for a half hour, 40 minutes to get to school because either the bus didn't show up, I couldn't get on, or it came and you didn't want to get on, and so we just wound up walking for.
And the difference with New York City, and I mean, just for me growing up on Second Avenue, there was bus after bus, and it was still crowded, but there were bus after bus.
Yes.
Opportunities.
Yes.
In Long Beach, you don't have that. You don't have as many buses running.
Right, so if you miss
Whether
the
or not
bus.
you'd be going into the train station and having to have the transfer if you're coming from the west.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of issues that we
Right.
have to, and then at Blackheath, you mentioned whether or not we would then really need a crossing guard on that road.
Right.
If you have that influx of
Right.
many students,
Right.
so
Well, yeah.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and where I grew up, it was a two-bus route, so wherever we went, so we had one bus to the other to the school. And it was not good, I'm just gonna say, this was